Integral Humanism, Lecture 1, Our Direction. I am asked to present my thoughts on the subject of integral humanism in a series of talks beginning this evening. Last January at Vijayawada, the Bharatiya Janasangh adopted the Statement of Principles and Policies in which the term integral humanism was also accepted. There have been scattered discussions here and there on the subject. It is necessary that we consider integral humanism in all its aspects. So long as the country was under the yoke of the British rule, all the movements and policies in the country had one principal aim, which is to drive out the foreign rulers and to achieve independence. But what would be the face of the new Bharat after independence? In which direction were we to advance? These questions were not precisely thought out. It would not be correct to say that no thought was devoted to these aspects. There were people who even at that time had considered these questions. Gandhiji himself had set out his idea of the independent Bharat in his book Hind Swaraj. Prior to this, Lokmanya Tilak discussed the philosophical basis of the rejuvenation of Bharat in his book Gita Rahasya. He gave a comparative exposition of various schools of thought current all over the world at that time.
Apart from these, the Congress and other political parties adopted various resolutions from time to time which contain references to this subject. However, the subject requires much more serious thought than was devoted to it at that time. It did not attract serious attention then because everyone believed that it was more important to think of the ways to drive out the British, and the other things could be discussed later on. It did not seem right to waste time in internal discussions while foreign rule continued. Hence, even if there might have been differences in views, they were shelved from the time being. As a result, even those who held the view that socialism should be the basis of the future Bharat worked inside the Congress as a socialist group. They did not attempt to form a separate party as such. The revolutionaries, too, were working for independence in their own way. All were agreed, however, that the foremost task was to gain independence. Whither Bharat? Having attained independence, the question naturally ought to have to occur to us. Now that we are independent, what shall be the direction of our progress? But it is amazing that serious thought has not been given to this question, and today, even after 17 years of independence, we cannot say that a definite direction has been decided upon. From time to time, congressmen and other declared welfare states, socialism, liberalism, etc. as their aims. Slogans have been raised. Apart from slogans, they have attached little significance to ideologies or comprehensive and integrated thought systems which alone determine the direction one has to follow. I'm saying this on the basis of personal discussions. A leading gentleman once suggested during a conversation that a joint front should be formed against the Congress so that a good fight could be given. Nowadays, political parties adopt this strategy. So it was not surprising to put forward this suggestion. However, naturally I asked, what program shall we adopt? If such a joint front is to be formed, some ideal of the program is essential. What will be our economic policy? What will be our foreign policy? These questions should also be tackled broadly. Do not worry about them. Whatever you like, you can adopt. We are ready to support anything from an extreme Marxist to a downright capitalist program. The reply came as if this was natural. He had no difficulty in adopting any program. The only object was that somehow the Congress should be defeated. Even now, some declare that the Congress must be defeated even with the cooperation of communists and all the rest. Recently, elections were held in Kerala. During these elections, the Communists, Muslim League, Swatantra Party, SSP, Rebel Congress known as Kerala Congress, Revolutionary Socialist Party, etc. entered into a variety of bilateral or multiple alliances. As a result, It was difficult to imagine whether any of these parties had a definite ideology, principles, and aims. This is the situation as far as principles are concerned. Congress, too, is in a similar state. Even though the Congress has proclaimed democratic socialism as its goal, the behavior of various Congress leaders shows one thing clearly, that there are no definite principles, no single direction in the Congress. There are staunch communists in the Congress fold. There are also those who have faith in capitalism and oppose communism to the teeth. All sorts of people are arrayed in the Congress platform. If there can be a magic box which contains a cobra and a mongoose living together, it is Congress. We must ponder whether we can progress under such conditions. If we stop to analyze the reasons for the problems facing the country, we find that the confusion about a goal and a direction is mainly responsible for this chaos. I realize that all the 450 million people of Bharat cannot agree on all or even a single question. This is not possible in any country. Yet there is generally what is called more or less a common desire of the people of any nation. If this popular longing is made the basis of our aim, the common man feels that the nation is moving in a proper direction and that his own aspiration is reflected in the efforts of the nation. This also generates the greatest possible feeling of unity. The truth of the statement is borne out by the response of the people during the Chinese invasion of October-November 1962. A wave of enthusiasm swept across the country. A remarkable upsurge, both in action and sacrifice, was discernible. There was no barrier between the government and the public or between various political parties. How did this happen? The external threat made us recognize ourselves. The government adopted that policy which reflected the widespread feeling of the people and which enhanced their sense of self-respect with the call for sacrifice. As a consequence, we stood united. The root of our problems: neglect of self. It is essential that we think about our national identity. Without this identity, there is no meaning of independence, nor can independence become the instrument of progress and happiness. As long as we are unaware of the national identity, we cannot recognize or develop all our potentialities. Under alien rule, this identity is suppressed. The reason why nations wish to remain independent is so that they can progress according to their own natural bent and can experience happiness in their endeavor. Nature is powerful. An attempt to go against nature or to disregard her leads to trouble. Natural instincts cannot be disregarded, but it is possible to elevate this nature to the level of culture. Modern psychology informs us how a person begins to suffer from different mental ailments when his various natural instincts are suppressed. Such a person remains restless and dejected. His abilities slowly deteriorate and become perverted. The nation too, like the individual, becomes a prey to these numerous ills when its natural instincts are disregarded. The basic cause of the problems facing Bharat is the neglect of its national identity. A majority of those who lead the nation today, as well as those who take an active interest in the affairs of the country, are not sufficiently aware of this root cause. Consequently, opportunists with no principles reign in the policies of our country. Parties and politicians have neither principles nor aims nor a standard code of conduct. A person feels there's nothing wrong in leaving one party and joining other. Even alliances and mergers of parties or their bifurcations are dictated not by agreements or by differences in principles, but purely by the gains in elections or in positions of power. In 1939, Sir Hafiz Muhammad Ibrahim was elected on the Muslim League ticket. Later on, when he joined the Congress, he resigned in pursuance of the healthy principles of public conduct, sought re-election on the Congress ticket, and was once again elected. In 1948, when some socialists left Congress and founded the Socialist Party, all those who were members of the legislatures resigned and fought elections on the socialist tickets. But thereafter, this healthy tradition was forgotten. Now, there is complete license in politics. As a result, in the public mind, there is distrust for everyone. There is hardly any person whose integrity is beyond doubt in the public mind. This situation must be changed. Otherwise, unity and discipline cannot be established in society.
Where should we start? The nation is at the crossroads. Some people suggest that we must start from where we left off 1000 years ago when foreign invaders disrupted our life. But the nation is not an inanimate object like a cloth, so that weaving can be taken up after a gap in time. Besides, it would not be rational to say that the 1000-year-old alien rule had interrupted the current of our national life so completely that from that time to this day we remain static and inert. The nation has certainly put its genius to work in the changing circumstances to meet the challenges thrown at it. We have struggled to continue our life forward and to wrest independence from the aliens. The current of our national life was not interrupted but has gone on ceaselessly. The task of turning waters of Ganga back to same previous point would not be wise. The Ganga at Banaras may not be as crystal clear as the Haridwar, but still it is the same holy Ganga. It has absorbed numerous rivulets with all their refuse. However, these have no separate existence but have become the Ganga. The current of the Ganga must inevitably flow onwards. If this was all that happened, it would still not be a big problem. But there are other nations in the world. They have made phenomenal progress in the past 1000 years. Our entire attention was engaged in fighting for independence or staving off the new hordes of invaders. We have not been able to contribute to world progress. Now, when we are free, is it not paramount that we fill this deficiency at the earliest and stand shoulder to shoulder with other advanced nations of the world? Ill effects of British rule. Up to this point, there is no room for difference of opinion. The difficulty arises when we fail to discern the reasons of the spectacular advance of the West and its effect real and apparent. This is further complicated by the fact that the Britishers, a representative of the West, ruled this country for a century and during this period adopted such measures whereby in the minds of our people a contempt for things Bharatiya and respect for everything Western was subtly created. Along with the scientific advance, their way of life, manners and food habits, etc. came to this country. Not only material sciences, but also their social, economic and political doctrines became our standards. The effect of all these are clearly discernible today in the educated persons of our country. We shall have to decide whether this effect is good or bad for us. We had taken pride in resisting British things while they ruled us, but strangely enough, now that the Britishers have left, Westernization has become synonymous with progress. It is true that a narrow sense of nationalism should not be allowed to obstruct the progress of the nation. However, Western science and the Western way of life are two different things. Whereas Western science is universal and must be absorbed by us if we wish to go forward, the same is not true of the Western way of life and values. In fact, thoughtless imitation of the West must be scrupulously avoided. There are those who consider economic and political doctrines of the West as the epitome of progress and desire to transplant the same in our country. Therefore, when we are trying to decide where we wish to take our country and how, we must also take into consideration the basis of various economic and political doctrines of the West and their present position. The rise of European nations. Among the various isms
that have affected the West, the principal ones were nationalism, democracy, and socialism. At the same time, there have been some who cherish world unity and world peace and have made some efforts in that direction. Of these, nationalism is the oldest and strongest. After the fall of the Roman Empire and decline in the influence of the Catholic Church, Europe witnessed the rise of several nations. The history of Europe in the past 1,000 years is the history of the rise of and conflicts among various nations. These nations extended their empires beyond the European continent and subjugated other independent countries. Nationalism brought nation and state together, resulting in nation-states. At the same time, the decline in the influence of the Roman Church gave rise either to national churches or to a complete disappearance of religious influence on politics. Anyway, the concept of a secular state arose out of this situation. Birth of democracy in Europe. A revolutionary concept which made a deep impact on the political life of Europe is democracy. In the beginning, every nation had a king as its head, but there was a gradual awakening in the minds of the people against the autocracy of the royalty. The Industrial Revolution and international trade resulted in the rise of a business community in all nations. Naturally, there ensued a conflict between these new centers of power and the established king and feudal lords. The fundamental principles of democracy became the pivot around which this conflict revolved. The origin of democracy was sought in the Greek city republics. The common man was attracted by the lofty ideals of equality, fraternity, and liberty of every citizen. France witnessed a bloody revolution. In England, too, there were periodic movements. The idea of democracy gained a foothold in the mind of the common man. Royalty was either liquidated or its powers were drastically curbed and constitutional governments were established. Today, democracy has been already accepted in Europe. Even those who have suppressed democracy do not denounce it. Dictators like Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin too paid lip service to democracy. Capitalist exploitation and Marxism. Every individual got a vote in the democratic setup, but real power stayed with those who had led the revolution. The Industrial Revolution had generated faith in the new methods of production. Instead of working in the freedom of the home, workers had started working in factories, taking orders from the factory owners. The worker migrated from his hometown to dwell in crowded cities. There was no provision for housing. There were hardly any rules in the factory to protect the worker. He was economically weak and not yet organized. He became a victim of exploitation, injustice, and harassment. Those in whom political power was vested were members of the same group who exploited the worker. Hence, there was no hope for redress from the state. A number of persons led movements in protest against the injustice, with the desire to improve the lot of workers. They called themselves socialists. Karl Marx was one of them. In an effort to lead the movement against this injustice, he studied the entire history and structure and presented his analysis of the situation. He claimed to have given a scientific basis to his theories. All the subsequent socialists might not have agreed with Marx, but they were all considerably influenced by his ideas. According to Marx's analysis dialectical materialism, the root cause of exploitation lies in the private ownership of the means of production. If these means were made property of the society, then there will be no further exploitation. But before this, the state should be redeemed from the hands of the exploiters and insured against their influence in future. Towards this end, dictatorship of the proletariat must be established. In order that people may tolerate this dictatorship, it was held as an ideal that when the exploited class has been finally liquidated and no possibility of its resurgence exists, the state will be replaced by a classless, stateless society. Marx also attempted to show that capitalism contained the seeds of its own destruction and that socialism is inevitable. 3 contradictory ideals. In some countries of Europe, there was a socialist revolution. Even where socialism was not accepted, the politicians had to accept the rights of workers. Welfare state was accepted as an ideal. Nationalism, democracy, socialism, or equality, these 3 doctrines have dominated European social and political thinking. Every now and then, apart from these, the ideals of world peace and world unity were also advocated. All these are good ideals, they reflect the higher aspirations of mankind. But by itself, each stands opposed to the rest in practice. Nationalism poses a threat to world peace. Democracy and capitalism join hands to give a free rein to exploitation. Socialism replaced capitalism and brought with it an end to democracy and individual freedom. Hence, the West is at present faced with the task of reconciling these good ideals. They have not succeeded in this task to date. They have tried combinations and permutations by placing emphasis on one or the other ideal. England emphasized nationalism and democracy and developed her political social institutions along those lines, whereas France could not adopt the same. There, democracy resulted in political instability. The British Labour Party wanted to reconcile socialism with democracy, but people have raised doubts whether democracy will survive if socialism gains strength. Hence, the Labour Party no longer supports socialism as strongly as the Marxist doctrines advocated. If socialism has been diluted considerably, Hitler and Mussolini adopted nationalism cum socialism and buried democracy. In the end, socialism also became a tool of their nationalism, which posed a great threat to the world peace and unity. We may indeed seek some guidance from the Western world, but the fact is that it has no concrete suggestions to offer. It is itself at the crossroads and unable to decide what is good. Under such circumstances, we cannot expect guidance from the West. On the contrary, we must consider whether in this present state of the world, we can contribute something to resolve this dilemma. Having taken note of the progress of the world, can we add to the common store of knowledge? As a member of the world community, we must discharge our responsibilities. Having taken note of the progress of the world, can we add to the common store of knowledge? As a member of the world community, we must discharge our responsibilities. If we possess something that may provide help to world progress, we should not hesitate in imparting it to the world. In this era of adulteration, instead of adulterating ideas, we must, on the contrary, scrutinize and improve upon them wherever possible before accepting them. Rather than being a burden to the world, we must attempt to resolve, if possible, the problems facing the world. We must also consider what contributions our traditions and civilization can make to the world culture. We shall consider this tomorrow evening. End of Lecture 1.